Hey guys, what's going on? In this video, I will show you step by step how to install a mini split. I will try to be as detailed as possible to make it easy to follow. For this demonstration, I will be installing the Senville LETO mini split and heat pump. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. When it comes to installing a mini split, the first step is determining the power needed to cool the area. To do this, simply multiply the length of the room by its width, and you'll get the square footage. With that number, you can figure out the amount of BTUs are needed. Here's a quick reference guide I put together based on the recommended sizes from Senville. Keep in mind that these numbers are specific to their units and are based on their air conditioning performance. So if you're using another brand, the BTU requirements might be a little different. Always check the specs for your unit to be sure. The area I want to cool is my garage, which is 20 by 20 feet, giving me 400 square feet. Based on that, I could have gone with the 9000 BTU version, but I decided to go with the 12,000 BTU version instead. The reason for this is that other factors can affect cooling needs. For example, garages are usually less insulated than regular rooms, and I live in a place where summers get really hot. Another important factor is the ceiling height. If your ceiling is higher than 8 feet, you might need more BTUs to cool the space effectively. Once we have the unit we need, the next step is figuring out where to place it. My recommendation is to choose a centrally located spot, positioned high on the wall so it can cool the space effectively. In my case, the best spot I found was above these windows. However, this placement comes with a few challenges which I'll show you later. Before we get started with the installation, I just want to say I highly recommend having a professional do this. The AC does come with a warranty, but if something gets damaged during installation, you could lose it. So, it is always better to be safe and ensure the job is done correctly. I'll jump right into the installation to keep this video shorter. But if you'd like to see another video where I unbox this unit and show what is included, I will leave a link for you. Now, let's jump into it. We are starting with the indoor unit. The first step is removing the back panel. It is being held in place with a single screw, so by removing that screw, the panel is coming off easily. Then, we will install this back panel, which serves as the support for the unit. One important thing to keep in mind is that the indoor unit takes in air from the top, so you need to leave at least 6 inches of space between the unit and the ceiling for proper ventilation. In my case, my mini split will not operate at maximum efficiency because it doesn't have the required space between the ceiling and the unit. However, I'm okay with that for my setup since this is the only spot where I could install it. Once that piece is installed, the next step is figuring out where to make the hole for the pipes and cables to pass through. There are 4 possible directions where you can route them. The cleanest option is to run the pipes directly through the back, so they stay hidden. However, in my case, doing that would damage the structure of the windows. Instead, I will run the pipes to the left until I find a safe spot to make the hole without compromising the structure. To make the hole for the pipes and cables, you'll need a 2 1/2-inch hole saw. If your wall is made of wood, you can use a standard hole saw like this one. However, since my wall is made of concrete, I'm using a concrete-specific hole saw designed for tougher materials. I am making sure the path between the AC unit and the hole is having a slight downward angle. This is being done to prevent any water from pooling or clogging in the drainage line. To start, I use a long drill bit to create a pilot hole all the way through the wall. This helped guide me and ensure proper alignment. I also made sure to angle the pilot hole slightly downward for proper drainage. Once that was done, I used the hole saw to create the larger opening on both sides of the wall. So here's how the hole turned out. Now we can move on to preparing the indoor unit. On the back of the unit, you will find 2 tubes, one for low pressure and one for high pressure. I will start by removing the caps on these tubes. When you remove them, you will hear a slight hissing sound. That is a small amount of gas escaping, which is a good sign because it means the unit was sealed properly and the refrigerant system hasn't been compromised. If you don't hear that sound, it could indicate an issue with the unit's seal, so keep an eye on that. The next step is to connect the cables that go from the indoor unit to the outdoor unit. To do this, start by opening the front panel of the indoor unit. Once it's open, you'll see a small cover that needs to be removed. This is where the electrical connections will be made. Now, I am taking the cable and feeding it through the back of the unit, specifically through this designated hole. Once the cable is through, you will find a sticker near the connection area that shows you exactly how to wire it. Simply match the wires to their corresponding terminals as indicated on the sticker. Finally, I am securing the cable by attaching the provided holder to keep it in place. And here's how it is looking once everything is connected and properly secured. Now, let's close up the front panel and move to the back of the unit to set up the drainage hose. The drainage hose is already pre-installed on the left side of the unit. However, since we're running all the pipes and cables to the right, we need to relocate the drainage hose to the right side. This is important because we want the water to follow the shortest path possible. To move the hose, I will start by removing the pin that locks it in place. It's a simple mechanism. Just pull out the pin and the hose will come loose. Next, on the right side of the unit, there is a plug covering the drainage hole. I am removing that plug and moving it to the left side, where the hose was originally installed since we are not using that hole. The plug can be tricky to push in by hand. To make it easier, I am using something long and smooth, like this Allen key. With that, I am able to press the plug firmly into place without damaging it. Once the plug is secure, I attach the drainage hose to the right side and lock it in with the pin. Now it's ready to go and the water will have a clear, direct path out of the unit. Since we're running the tubes to this side, I'll need to cut this plastic piece to make space. It already has markings showing where you can cut, which makes it easier. For this, I just use brute force because I plan to cover this area later, so it doesn't need to look perfect. However, if you want a clean finish, you can use a small handsaw or a utility knife. Before installing the tubes, I went ahead and installed two different cover kits, one for the tubes inside and one for the outside. These kits are optional, but help make the installation look cleaner and more professional by covering the exposed tubes. If you're interested in this or any of the products I use for this installation, I'll leave the links in the description below. Now, everything is set up to run through the hole, and this is where the outside part of the AC will be installed. In my case, I decided to place the outdoor unit on a base. This choice depends entirely on your needs. Initially, I bought this mounting bracket kit because I wasn't sure where I'd put the unit, but I eventually decided the base was the best option for my setup. I used 4 16 by 16 concrete pavers I already had from another project. However, the ideal solution would be to pour a custom concrete base for better durability and stability. Just make sure the base is level, solid, and able to support the weight of the unit without shifting over time. Now, let's get back to setting up the tubes. First, we need to unroll them since they come coiled. For this step, you have to be very careful because the tubes are delicate and can get damaged if you're not gentle. The best way to do this is by using the floor for support, like this. Just roll them out slowly and evenly to avoid kinks or bends. After unrolling the tubes, I measured them to double check, and they're exactly 16 feet long just as described. I will cut them later to make them shorter, but the minimum length you can go is 10 feet. This is important because the refrigerant needs enough length to flow properly between the indoor and outdoor units, and cutting them too short can affect performance. While I had the tubes measured, I took the opportunity to mark the maximum amount I can cut, and I also marked the side I can cut to avoid getting confused later. To connect the tubes, I'll be using nylon blue, which is a sealant specifically designed for air conditioning systems. It doesn't harden like other sealants. Instead, it stays soft and creates a flexible, airtight seal. After applying the sealant, I use 2 adjustable wrenches, one to hold the fitting steady and the other to tighten the nut. This method ensures the connection is tight without putting unnecessary stress on the fittings. Now, I measure the distance from the AC to the hole and mark the tubes where I'll need to bend them. To bend the tubes, you have to be extremely careful, as they are delicate and can kink or crack if mishandled. The best way is to support the tube with both hands and bend it slowly and evenly, ensuring it maintains its shape without sharp angles. Once the tubes are in place, I am sealing everything using the sealing tape provided in the kit. This tape is helping to bundle and protect all four components: the high pressure tube, the low pressure tube, the electrical cable, and the drainage hose. Here I also connected the drainage hose, which snaps into place with a bit of pressure. This is how everything looks so far. I carefully put the front part of the unit in place and guided everything through the hole to the outside. Now that all the connections are in place, I will carefully bend the tube downward. Again, I'm being as gentle as possible because the tube is delicate and can crack easily if not handled properly. I ran into a little issue here because I needed to pass the tubes behind a section. What I did was roll the tubes back up, similar to how they came originally, so I could pass them through that tight spot. Then I carefully unrolled them little by little like this to make it work. This is the mark I made earlier, which is showing we're in the right spot with enough space to cut the tubes, so we can proceed to seal everything to keep it neat and secure. This is how it looks now. I also trimmed the excess drainage hose and redirected it toward this plant so it can make use of the water. With everything ready, I placed the AC in position and measured where to cut the tubes. Cutting them isn't strictly necessary. You can roll them up instead. However, rolling them up can reduce efficiency and may cause drainage or refrigerant issues if the tubes end up in low positions. To keep everything working well and looking neat, I decided to cut the tubes to the right length. Now, let me give you a quick tutorial on how to cut and flare the tubes. For this, I will be using the Wostor Flaring Tools kit, along with a deburring tool. If you don't have a deburring tool, you can also use a reamer to get the job done. First, I'm going to use this tubing cutter to make the cut. The process is really simple. Align the blade on the tube, making sure it is straight. Then, I gently tighten the cutter and start rotating it around the tube. With each rotation, I tighten it a little more until the tube is completely cut through. After cutting, the next step is to use the deburring tool or the reamer to smooth out the edges. This is an important step to prevent any damage to the flare or potential leaks. Now, place the tube in the flaring tool, leaving just a small amount sticking out about the thickness of a dime. Tighten the clamp to hold it securely in place. Then, slowly turn the handle, pressing the cone into the tube until it forms a nice, smooth flare. Once you're done, check the flare. It should be even, smooth, and free of any cracks. If it looks good, you're ready to move on to the next step. Now, we're going to connect the tubes to their designated spots. I applied a bit of the same sealant I used earlier to ensure a tight and secure connection. To tighten them, I'm using two wrenches again. One to hold the fitting steady to avoid putting too much pressure on it, and the other to securely tighten the connection. So now we're ready to move to the next step. Vacuuming the system to ensure there are no leaks before releasing the refrigerant. For this, I'm using the Extreme Power vacuum pump. It's not the highest end model, but it's more than enough for what we need. This kit already comes with a set of gauges that we also need. The kit includes 3 hoses, but in this case we're not going to use the red one, as that's typically used for cars and other applications. If you've never used a vacuum pump like this before and it's your first time, you'll need to add some oil before using it. The pump already comes with a bottle of oil included. To add it, you'll need to remove this piece here. This is where you'll pour the oil like this. On the front of the pump, you'll see a gauge that indicates the correct oil level. Pour the oil until it reaches the marker, making sure not to overfill it. Finally, remove this small cap on top and your vacuum pump is ready to use. Moving on the side of the outdoor unit, there are 3 service port caps. I'm going to remove all of them. The first one is where we'll connect the vacuum pump to start the vacuuming process. The other 2 screws simply cover the mechanism that we'll use later to release the refrigerant. Here we will need this adapter, which you will have to get separately. It is the 1/4 to 5/16 that connects the blue tube to the AC service port. One important thing to remember is to tighten all the connections by hand. Don't use any tools to over-tighten them. When the vacuum is running, the system will naturally seal, so hand tightening is enough to ensure a proper connection. Now, that blue tube that we just connected is going to the low pressure of the gauge, and then here is where you will connect the yellow one, which is the one that goes directly to the pump. So basically, this is how the setup looks like. Before starting the vacuuming process, we need to open the low pressure side on the gauge and close the high pressure valve since we won't be using it. Now, when I turn the vacuum on, you will notice some vapor coming out for about 15 seconds, and then it should stop. Let's turn it on. As you can see, there's the vapor. This is just the pump expelling any residual moisture or air inside it, which is completely normal. Once the vapor stops, it is a good sign that the vacuum is working properly. What we're aiming for is to create a vacuum of around 500 microns or lower. This ensures that all air and moisture are removed from the system. So, I'm going to leave the vacuum running for about 15 minutes to achieve the proper vacuum level. Now, it's been about 17 minutes, which is enough time. Following this order, I'm going to first close the low pressure valve and then turn off the vacuum. Then, looking at the gauge, it shows minus 30 inches of mercury, which is exactly what we were aiming for. Next, I'm going to reset the timer and leave it for about 30 minutes. When we come back, if it is still holding at minus 30, it means that there are no leaks in the system. So now, 30 minutes later, we're back, and the gauge is still holding at minus 30, which means there are no leaks in the system. Then we can move on to the next step. If you don't see minus 30 on the gauge, that indicates a leak in the system, so double check all the connections before proceeding. Basically, what I'm going to do now before removing the vacuum pump is release the refrigerant for 5 seconds to add positive pressure to the line. Using an Allen tool, I'll turn the valve a quarter turn for just 5 seconds. And now, the gauge is showing positive pressure. This step isn't strictly necessary since we've already checked for leaks, but I will leave the system a few minutes with positive pressure just to double check that everything is fine. So now I am back a few minutes later and the pressure remains the same, which is exactly what we were looking for. Now I'm going to remove the connections we made earlier. A small amount of pressure will escape, but it's minimal. After that, we can put the cover back in place. Now it's time to release the refrigerant. To do this, I will open both the low pressure and high pressure valves by turning them all the way until they stop. Just make sure not to over tighten or force them. Once the refrigerant is released, we'll put the caps back on the valves. And here, as an alternative, you can use a leak detector liquid or a mix of soapy water. Simply spray it on all the connections to check for leaks. However, in this case, it is not necessary since we have already verified there are no leaks. I also sealed the hole where we passed all the tubes earlier using the provided putty. This helps prevent water, dust, or insects from getting inside and keeps everything clean and secure. Now that we've finished connecting everything, it's time to move on to the electrical setup. If you are not familiar or comfortable with electrical work, I strongly recommend hiring a professional electrician for this step. I'm comfortable doing it myself. but it's always better to get expert help if you're unsure. We will start by removing this panel, where we'll connect both the cables coming from the AC and the cable that goes to our power source. On the back of the panel cover we just removed, there's a small diagram showing how to make the connections. The diagram may not match the exact order of the connections, but the key is to connect the cables the same way you wire them to the indoor unit. In my case, I don't need to cut the cable because it's the perfect length. But if you want to keep everything nice and organized and need to shorten the cable, you can easily do it. You can use connectors like these, which are similar to the ones that come with the cable. You'll also need a crimping tool to securely attach the connectors. It's a quick process and really easy to do. Before connecting everything, I will use this wire cover to protect the cables from weather. It helps keep the cables safe and gives the setup a clean, professional look. I will also use these electrical conduit connectors to securely attach the tubes to the panel. I cut the tube to the exact size I needed, ran the cable through it, and secured it to the panel using the connector. Here, I've already made the connections for the cables that link the indoor unit to the outdoor unit. Now, we're going to connect the cable that supplies the power. The proper way to do this is to connect the cable from the unit to a disconnect box and then run it from the disconnect box to the main switch panel, ensuring it has its own dedicated breaker. The type of cable and breaker you'll need will depend on your unit's power consumption. In my case, since this unit is 12,000 BTU and uses 110 volts, the recommended cable is a 12 gauge wire, and for the breaker, a 20 amp breaker. I will leave you a quick list for each case, detailing what you'll need based on the size and power of your mini split. From here, I made the connection, and this is how everything looks. After that, I closed the panel and moved on to setting up the disconnect box. I started by opening a hole on the wall. This is where the cable from my main panel switch will pass through, and it's also the spot where I will install the disconnect box. For this setup, I'm using a fuse disconnect box, but that's only because I already had it and wanted to use it instead of buying a new one. That said, I don't recommend using a fuse disconnect box for this type of installation. A standard disconnect box without a fuse is a better option here. The fuse box adds unnecessary protection to the line, which isn't ideal for this setup, but it is something I can easily replace later if needed. While there are cases where a fuse disconnect box is required, this isn't one of them, so I recommend going with the simpler version. The disconnect box comes with these pre-made holes that you can remove to pass the cables through. Here, I repeated the same process as before. I passed the cable through a protective tube to safeguard the line and secured everything firmly in place. The purpose of the disconnect box is to provide a quick and easy way to cut power to the outdoor unit for maintenance or emergencies. I also applied some putty around the hole where the cable passes through to make sure no water or moisture can get inside. Additionally, I used silicone around the edges to seal everything and protect it from water. Then I put all the covers on the lines, and now we're moving to the final step, which is securing the AC to the base. For this step, I use concrete anchor bolts like this. I chose them because there isn't a good angle to use regular screws in this setup, and these anchor bolts provide a much more secure and stable hold. Don't forget to add the rubber pads included between the base and the AC. These pads help absorb vibrations and prevent the unit from shifting or making noise during operation. And there it is. This is how the final setup looks, with all the connections secured and the tubes and covers neatly installed. I am really happy with how it turned out. Thank you for watching the video. I really hope it helped you with your installation. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. I'll be more than happy to help. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more helpful guides and tips.